Hello, my name is Paul Dooley, and once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, I played Enabrin Tain for several episodes in Deep Space Nine. And right now, you're listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. This week on the show, I get to cross off another personal goal of mine from back when I first started this podcast. I've talked about a certain list I had when I conceived this show, and that was my dream list of names to speak with. It wasn't just like big names, but also a lot more of the obscure character actors. And so far, I've crossed off a lot of names from that list, but there's still many to be found. Today, I can scratch one more line from that list because I had the chance to speak with the legendary Mr. Paul Dooley. If you're a DS9 fan, and who isn't, you will know Paul from his 4 episodes there as Enabrin Tain. He was dressed in Cardassian makeup and was the leader of the Obsidian Order, first in the Season 2 episode The Wire, followed by Improbable Cause and The Die Is Cast in Season 3, and finally with the conclusion to his character's story in Season 5's episode In Purgatory's Shadow. Outside of his work in Star Trek, Paul Dooley's career spans decades, with some amazing work that I'm sure you've seen him in. And that includes things like Bewitched, Death Wish, the Popeye movie, yes, that Popeye movie, and yes, we're going to talk about it, Strange Brew, 16 Candles, Breaking Away, Mother of the Bride, My So-Called Life, Waiting for Guffman, A Mighty Wind, The Practice, Scrubs, and a bunch of other shows and movies where he's played the role of the father. In fact, he's played that part so many times in his illustrious career that that's the name of his new autobiography, Movie Dad. And it goes into all the details of his life and career, including some shocking revelations that I'm not allowed to reveal in this episode and some that weren't even allowed to discuss. Paul wanted some moments of his life to be a surprise to the readers, and having read the book, I can promise you, you will definitely be surprised, as well as informed and very much entertained hearing about his life. Now, as for that Movie Dad book, the one downside is that Paul only discusses Star Trek for half a page. But the good news is, this episode of Trek Untold is the perfect companion to Movie Dad for the Trekkies out there, because we fill in all of those gaps in the Deep Space Nine story and give you the full details about his time on that set. At 94 years old, Paul has lived quite a life, to put it mildly, and I am very honored to present my time with him today. It's a real special moment for me, and one that I hope Paul enjoyed just a fraction as much as I did. But more importantly, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm pretty sure you will. So pour yourself a glass of Kanar. It's story time with Paul Dooley. But before we begin this week's episode, I want to remind you to follow Trek Untold on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold, all one word. You can get show updates, check out some fun memes, and let me know what you think about what's going on with the current events in the Star Trek universe. You can also support this show directly on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekUntold, where you can support this show for as little as $2 a month. At higher tiers, you can listen to the shows before they come out, know about my guests well in advance, and even have a chance to ask them questions, get transcripts of these episodes to make sure you get all the info, and more benefits coming soon, including watch parties and live streams. But that's all dependent on more fans like you coming over and letting me know you want to be a part of events like that. If you want some Trek Untold merchandise, check out our store for gear and apparel, including shirts, hats, stickers, water bottles, notebooks, and a whole lot more. New designs will be added throughout the year, so it's always worth taking a peek. Trek Untold also has an Amazon shop where you can peruse everything Star Trek, sci-fi, and geeky on Amazon in one convenient location. If you're looking for a gift for the Trekkie in your life, or maybe want to see some of my favorite non-Star Trek things that you can get for yourself, check out the link for my Amazon shop in the show notes on the audio version and in the description below this video on YouTube. If you're listening to us on iTunes or any other audio platforms that allow for ratings and reviews, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review to help out this show. If you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us at youtube.com/TrekUntold and give the video a thumbs up and a comment. All of these things help more people find this show and to continue growing and bringing you awesome guests each and every week. Now, without further ado, let's beam in this week's guest. Computer, Access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold, and I am extremely excited today to announce our guest who's staring across the screen from me right now. He is a living legend. He has been in so many things, and I'm already running out of words because I'm verklempt, Paul. We're joined today by Mr. Paul Dooley. Paul, how are you today?
Fine. How are you?
I'm great.
Where are you calling from?
I'm from New York.
New York, yeah. I'm in Burbank, California.
Very nice. You've got the good weather. I'm freezing my butt off. But yeah, I gotta tell you, Paul, I started this podcast about 2 years ago, and I made this initial list of folks I wanted to have on, and your name was in that initial list. So it's taken me 2 years to get you, and I'm really thrilled to have you here. So already, before we even get started, just thank you for being here today. It's real wonderful just to even see you and get to spend this time with you.
Thank you.
So, we have a lot to talk about here, but I want to kick things off a little different from how I normally kick things off, because we're also here today to discuss your new book, your memoirs, which is titled Movie Dad. So, we're going to talk about some of these roles today, but I'm just curious, how many dads have you actually played through your career?
I've played about 25 to actors and actresses.
Wow.
Mostly actresses.
That is a lot of movie dads. And I feel like I don't know if I've seen all of those, but that's a lot. That's a big number. I mean, how did you end up getting this sort of typecast and become the official movie dad of Hollywood?
It probably came from the movie 16 Candles, which in which I had a scene with Molly Ringwald. And what had to happen was I apologized for the family had forgotten her birthday because her sister was getting married, and it was a confusion. So it's a nice scene where he seems to be so empathetic and warm and wonderful and understanding that it kind of made a big impression on particularly young women, probably from 14 to 25 or 30, because I constantly get people on the street coming up to me and said, "I wish you were my dad," because in real life, all dads aren't totally understanding. They might even be a little standoffish. Anyway, so I guess because of that movie, which was also pretty successful, when a name came up, let's look for a guy to be the father. Well, get that guy. He's already done it. Then one thing leads to another, and I had Julia Roberts as a daughter, and Toni Collette, and Mia Farrow, and endless names that came along. And I didn't mind being typecast but being typecast means you don't get the opportunity to play a lot of different kind of characters. But on the other hand, you're in demand or you're well known for that. And so it keeps you working. And no, what actor would not want that?
Very true.
But there's a lot of typecasting. If you look a little bit like a detective, you'll be playing detectives all your life.
Yeah.
Or if you look a little bit dishonest, you'll be the bad guy. Or if you're kind of goofy looking, you'll be the sidekick. But Hollywood likes typecasting.
Yeah, I feel like it's amazing to get, Oscars and Golden Globes and BAFTAs, but I feel like to have someone walk up to you on the street and say, "I wish you were my dad," that feels like a pretty amazing compliment to get.
Yeah, and half of the mail I get are from young women who will either send me a picture they have or ask me to send a picture signed from that 16 Candles scene.
Oh, wow.
The cover of my book is me and Molly with her in a sofa and me talking to her.
Yeah, it's a very, very iconic scene. And we're going to talk about Movie Dad throughout this interview here, but I just want to make sure folks know right off the bat that you guys got to check out the book. I just read it before we did this chat today. It was really wonderful just reading about all your stories and your amazing life, because just for folks who don't know, I mean, you are 94. That is a life that has been lived, sir. And you've got some pretty amazing stories in there. We'll get to a few of them today.
Yeah, I'm lucky to be in good health.
Yeah, and I'm lucky too, because that's how I get to talk to you today. So yeah, but let me toss you my question I usually throw my guests first, and that's Paul. What's your earliest memory of Star Trek? Did you ever watch it in the '60s when it first aired?
Well, I watched. I wasn't actually a science fiction fan until I saw Star Wars and the various iterations of Star Wars. But because of my own career, I was kind of busy a lot of the time doing my own thing. I didn't watch Star Trek before I was hired to be on it. Then, of course, I got interested and I started watching it, keeping up with it, because then I felt a part of the family. I only did 4 episodes, But Trekkies are so dedicated to people who have been in Star Trek that that's enough for them to chase me down to get an autograph.
And if I saw you in the street, I would absolutely be doing that. But I wouground mind getting some background information right now too from you. Which again, this stuff's in the book in great detail. But just to give folks a teaser out there, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, who your parents were, and what they did, and what little Paul wanted to be when he grew up?
Well, the first thing was to be an artist because I used to draw a lot. Then in high school, it drifted over into cartooning. And I was a cartoonist on the school paper and that kind of thing. But what interested me in show business, not that I wanted to be in show business, was I listened to the radio beginning at about 12. And I fell in love with the comedians on the radio. A couple were Red Skelton, Jimmy Durante, Jack Benny. I didn't think I want to be a comedian, or I could even be a comedian. I just fell in love with the idea of jokes. And my whole life, I've been have kept a tremendous vocabulary or a library in my head of all the jokes that I liked. So I have thousands of jokes in my head just because that's a quirk of what I like. And I'm still very, very interested in comedians and comedy films and comedy TV shows and all that. And I didn't know I would ever be an actor, but I was a maven, if you will, for humor. And it was great fun for me.
Now, how about where you grew up and who your parents were?
Well, we lived on the outskirts of a town. It wasn't exactly farmland, but it was about a halfway farm. The houses were, what you'd call 2 blocks away from each other, but it wasn't like being in a real farm country with huge gardens. My father actually built our house from scratch himself. Took him 2 years to do it, but he did it all himself. I don't know how he did it. I've never been able to figure out how he could be so good at that. He left school in the 3rd grade. He had terrible eyesight. I'm trying to think, how can you put a cabinet up when you can't measure 1 inch and 1/4 or 3/4 of an inch? He had these big eyeglasses that enlarged his eyes, very thick glasses. How could he measure things right down to the 1/8 of an inch? I never understood it. He had no real book learning, but he taught himself. And I wasn't impressed by it when it happened because I thought every father built his own house. What did I know? Only years later, talking to my analyst about it, by the way, whose name was Kaplowitz.
Possibly related.
And Dan Kaplowitz, I was with him on and off for about 20 years. I'd go away to make a movie or do a job and come back to New York and pick up again. So he was very helpful to me.
Well, on behalf of all Caplowitzes everywhere, we thank you for your patronage.
But he made me understand that my father, without any what they call book learning, was probably damned intelligent. Because how could he do all that when he didn't even he was never an apprentice to a trade. He just picked it up on his own. And when he ran out of money, he would stop until he got enough money to buy some more lumber or some whatever it was, paint. But he dug a foundation, he put in a cellar all by himself, no help. I wasn't impressed by it then, but the more I learned about what it took, the more admiring I was of how smart he was about that. But it was very bucolic. It was rolling hills near our house and a few houses, maybe half a mile away. And on every side would be some kind of a garden, like cornfield or something like that. And we had a garden 4 times the size of our house. And we lived out of the garden. And in the fall, some of those vegetables were canned and kept for winter. We always had leftover potatoes in a bin, a wooden bin in the basement, and they were cold. So we kind of lived out of the garden, not only in the summer, but also to some extent in the winter. And we were vegetarians until I was 17 and joined the Navy. So that's one of the reasons why I probably have longevity.
So what was the moment that made you decide that acting was going to be it for you? What was that epiphany that made you realize I'm going to be an actor now and this is my profession for the rest of my life?
I went to the Navy and came out, and a friend from high school who was a year ahead of me and was a lot more ambitious. If I thought I wanted to be an actor or even a cartoonist, I didn't have very much belief that I could make it because we were such a small town. Where am I going to do that? How can I get started? Where do I move? But he was a kind of a mentor, which I didn't know the word for. But he said, what are you doing now that you're out of the service? He said, I'm working in a factory. So why don't you come to college? I'm up here at the State University. I said, well, doesn't that cost a lot of money? He says, no, don't be stupid. You're a veteran. You'll get tuition will be taken care of, and you'll also receive a monthly payment to live on. So even though I hadn't been planning on going to college or anything, nobody in my family ever finished high school, including my parents. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And he said, I'm studying acting and art, and he had a great voice, and he was had a job at the local college, the radio station in the college town. So here's a little bit of my role model because he was working on the stage in college already. And just by being there, and I decided to major in art and minor in a major in theater and minor in art. But over time, the theater took over, and I got the bug and worked in a lot of plays. Then you begin to get the idea that when you graduate, you go to New York. That was the Mecca. That was the kind of place in those days. Most actors went to New York and not California. California would be the next step. So you don't break into the movies quite that easily, but you can be in some church basement doing a play in New York, or off Broadway, even before you get as busy as being a Broadway actor. So there's a lot going on in New York. And it took me 9 years of not making very much money, about $3,000 a year I lived on. Then I did a commercial. You would probably remember from my book. I did a commercial. They loved the commercial. They made me a spokesman and gave me a guarantee of $40,000 for the year. So I went from $3,000 a year to $40,000 guaranteed. And that kind of changed my whole life. I veered into being a commercial actor because I was so successful at it. And I didn't try very hard to be stage actor or get into films. First of all, most of the films are in California. I was very happy. I was successful. I was pretty well known in the business with the advertising agencies. I was a sort of a WASP type, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And all the parts, all the kind of commercials I would get would be just that kind of a guy, the guy next door. I could sell the product or buy the product or be the neighbor, best friend, whatever. So there are lots of parts from my type. And for about 15 years, I did, I was supposed to be about 300 on-camera commercials in 15 years, national commercials, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But I was a type, just like I became a type for a father later, just an average guy next door. And then I got into the business of, I joined Second City and learned to improvise. And I had two partners, and we began to do so many radio commercials, humorous commercials, that we just actually became a team, and we actually became famous for it. We would do 2 or 3 radio recordings a week, or rather a day. We might do 10 or 15 a week. Always with some sort of joke at the end or some sort of humorous feeling about it. At first, we just did it, what they wrote. Then we asked them if we could just do the comedy that we would write. So then we became actors, writers. And believe it or not, an interviewer asked me how many commercials I'd made. And I happened to have some books There used to be a book called Week at a Glance, and I had one of those every week. And I had it in my garage in a box, and I had all my auditions in there.
Wow.
And when I got the job, I put an X or a check mark next to that product. I found I had done about 500 radio commercials in 15 years. So that I was so successful in that part of the business that I didn't think about going to California. I thought, what if they don't know me out there? Then what am I going to do then? Because every ad agency, every casting director in New York knew me. So very often I would get jobs with no audition, just direct bookings. Well, that's very attractive and very gratifying. So I did that for quite a long time, 15 years, as I say.
Yeah.
As soon as I started making films with Robert Altman, which is a whole change in my life, I stopped doing commercials and pretty much became a film actor because I did 4 or 5 movies in a row with Robert Altman.
Yeah.
I was 49 before I made my first movie.
Wow. I know people these days, it's like everybody's thinking, I'm 20 something or I'm 30 something and I'm not doing anything with my life. But meanwhile, 49 to get an Altman movie, and that's a life changer. So, it can happen at any point in anybody's life, basically. That's kind of the
Well, it
secret
was
here.
one of those lucky breaks. If I'd never met him, I'm not sure where I'd be. Maybe I'd be doing commercials for old men.
One of my podcast inspirations is someone who you've known for a very long time. That's Alan Alda. And,
Sure.
one of the reasons I started this podcast was because I was a big fan of Clear and Vivid, and that kind of helped me figure out my direction of what I wanted to do with this show. And I
Yeah.
loved hearing you two talk on a recent episode of the show. And, this kind of connects to what you just talked about with your improv, because I love this part of the podcast you did with him where you're talking about learning improv and working with Viola Spolin and some of the different things
That's
you guys
right.
would work on. And like the one story you mentioned, and you could help me figure out if I'm saying this right, but it was like doing a scene as animals in a zoo, but then doing it again with those characteristics now as human beings. And
Yeah.
it just sounds like
That's
a lot of these things you learned were just like so emotionally and physically freeing. And so
Yeah.
I'd really like to learn a little bit more about this world and some of the things that you learned with Viola Spolin and while you were learning to do improv.
Well, actually, I never met Viola, but I know her son, Paul Sills, who really was more responsible for. She was more of a teacher in situations first in Chicago, where she was teaching children to open up. Instead of boys playing baseball, some boys wanted to be in show business. So she taught improvisation in Chicago. Paul sort of took it into the mainstream with the Compass Theater in Chicago, then eventually became Second City. But I learned all the exercises from Viola's book. Probably every college in the country has her book if they're talking about improvisation. And she was the queen of that, She began learning games. She was Russian. And before television, before, who knows if it was radio or not, but way back when she was a kid, she lived in Chicago with a Russian family. And they played games in the living room, some of which gave birth to improvisational games, because they were improvisation. A game we played all the time in Second City was one actor leaves the room. The group decides who he is, famous or not. When he comes back, his job is to guess who he is. And what we do is we treat him as if he were that person. So it has a real history. And of course, Stanislavski taught improvisation as an aid to an actor. For example, he would talk about, before you make your entrance in a play, like Chekhov's play, I want you to know what you were doing before that, who you were, what you were thinking, what you were feeling. That's how Stanislavski kind of used improvisation as a help to the actor. But it evolved in America with the Compass Theater in Chicago, and then Second City. And now there are improvisations at every college, probably in the country. Second City is well over 50 years old and still going strong in Chicago.
Paul, when I do my research, I like to dig as far deep as I can into someone's resume. And one of my biggest things is to see how far back I can go and see if I can find the earliest thing for them. And for you, I was able to actually find your episode of Bewitched. And that was from 1966. It was called Oedipus Hex. And I would love to know if you have any memories from working on that set, because I feel like that's kind of a big break for you to have that early on in TV for yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I lived in New York, but a couple times people sent for me to come out here to do a part. And while I was out here, then I'd stay a little longer and pick up other parts. I think I came out for Get Smart to do an episode.
Yeah.
I happen to know one of the writers from New York. The agent out here, I was with William Morrison. They're on both coasts. He said, stay here 2 or 3 weeks, see what happens. So then I did Bewitched and a few other things. But those were about the earliest sitcoms, TV shows I did. But I did do some television in New York. There was a well-known show called The Defenders with E.G. Marshall and Robert Reed, father and son lawyers, I think it was. And I did some of that kind of work. Or doing small parts on Armstrong Theater, Robert Montgomery Presents, Hallmark. Yeah, a little bit here and there.
I'm curious if you have any memories of working with Elizabeth Montgomery or Dick York or Agnes Moorehead, just any of your time on set, if you recall any of that.
Well, it would be nice if I had those stories, but often it just happens that you do your part, they do their part. At 5 o'clock, you go home and you don't become best friends. As a professional, just come and do your work. They're very nice people. And over time, you do get to know some of them and work with them more than once. But a lot of times, it's a little bit like a factory. You have 5 lines, 10 lines, 15 lines. You go, you do your job in 1 day or 2 or 3. But everybody doesn't become everybody's best friend.
Right.
And unless something unusual happened, which is like memorable, it's just another day at work.
That's fair enough.
I did become friendly while working with Burt Reynolds because he is so social.
I've heard that.
He always liked to make friends with people he worked with. He liked to laugh. He would rather break up in a scene than to finish it properly.
I've heard a lot of good stories about him. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people worked with him. He expected them to try to make him laugh. He didn't care. Maybe he went over budget. What did he care? For 5 years, he was the biggest movie star. I made one movie with him called Paternity. I used to go to dinner with him after when it was over. Once we knew each other, occasionally we'd get together a few times. His girlfriend was Sally Fields, and I went to dinner with them several times. So he was kind of a friendly guy.
Now, I can tell you I've never heard anyone say a bad word about Burt Reynolds on this podcast, so I'm glad to hear it was great for you also.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we talk about on this show that isn't Star Trek, but is a regular thing of discussion here, is I'm a big fan of the Golden Girls. And you did 2 episodes of that series. First was Love Rose, but I kind of want to ask you a little bit more about the second episode that you did, which was basically the backdoor pilot for Empty Nests. That's right. And where you got to work with Rita Moreno, another main stage person here in New York City, big theater person, and her name also comes up a lot in this show too. But I'd love to hear if you have any memories of working with Rita and doing that pilot with all the ladies from the Golden Girls.
I can't remember if it was before or after Electric Company.
That would have been after, I believe.
Yeah, after. So I knew Rita for a whole year on the Electric Company, which I created and was the head writer for. So I had a lot of experience with her. Not that I was in the show very much, although I did voices for it frequently. But I would be on the set sometimes watching scenes. And I had my office in the west side of New York. And the studio's on the east side, but I had a monitor on my desk where I could watch rehearsals and to watch the shooting, so that if I never visited the set, I could see what was going on. And she did great on that show. She did so many wonderful things. The idea of the show isn't to reach normal kids, because normal white kids are going to learn how to read. There's no question. But they were trying to appeal to inner city kids. Hispanic kids would know who Rita Moreno was. She's very famous. She has 4 awards, EGOT.
Yep.
Everything. And Cosby, of course, would be known to the Black community. And we were looking for inner city kids who may, for one reason or another, don't go to school frequently. They may see teachers as authority figures they don't like. There are many reasons for it. Who knows if the parents sent them to school every day. Maybe they're out on the street running around. But they were trying to reach them. But I took it as a great compliment to use comedy to really do a very interesting assignment. I said to a friend, I got this job on the children's television workshop teaching reading to kids. And after all these years using my comedy skills just to make stupid commercials, I now think I'm doing something for good instead of evil, helping kids learn to read.
It's a pretty groundbreaking thing that you did with that series.
Yeah. I took it as a challenge to see what I could do, not just humor-wise or character-wise, but techniques of teaching them so they didn't look as if they'd been listening to teachers, but the characters would just be interacting with them. It didn't. We didn't want to do it at them, but for them.
Yeah, and that rapport that you have at Rita definitely came through, I guess, from the Electric Company over onto the Golden Girls as well when you work with her there.
That was, you're right, a backdoor pilot.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that you guys didn't get picked up for it. But, I mean, do you remember what happened to that episode? And I guess the whole story of why you guys didn't return to that show and why it was basically just recast and redone.
Well, Susan, I forget her last name, but it's a very famous woman who wrote a series called Soap. They made the pilot with me and Rita, and it was on the shelf. I guess a network, or maybe all the networks, rejected it. They weren't interested. But it was on the shelf for a year. Then they decided to try again, and they used their friend from the sitcom Soap, Richard Mulligan, I think it was.
Yep.
Anyway, they did it again, and they used a friend of theirs that they had a better relationship with, I guess. It didn't matter to me. I'd moved on to several other jobs by then. I kind of am glad I didn't ever do something that lasted 5 seasons. I had much more fun doing different things than the same thing.
I can understand that, but I would have loved to have seen you hang out more with Betty White, because you two had a lot of fun also.
Well, I met Betty on Golden Girls, and then I was on Hot in Cleveland, and another series with that she was on.
She was in Boston Legal, which you did also.
Boston Legal. I did a lot of those David Kelly shows.
Yeah.
I did The Practice. I did Ally McGraw. I did Boston Legal. All David Kelly. I had a lot of jobs that were running parts or reoccurring parts.
Yeah.
I did the Star Treks, 4 of them. I did The Practice, probably a dozen of them. So I had a lot of shows I was identified with, but were never a whole season of. It was okay with me. I like variety myself.
I mean, I'm happy you got a big wide resume too with a whole lot of variety, because there's some real wonderful things to pick through there. And, I feel like doing this interview, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Popeye to some extent, because that's a big thing. And, we talked a little bit earlier about Mr. Altman and some of the amazing work that he did. And you guys did have a working relationship together, which was really fun to hear the origins about that. We'll save that for the book. So if anybody wants to learn about that, check out Movie Dad. But let's talk a little bit about Popeye, because, I mean, they literally built an entire town to make this film.
Scratch.
Yeah, and then
it's the best set design I've ever seen.
It's pretty gorgeous. You actually look at that thing. It's like, they built this town from the ground up. And then in the book, you talk about how not only did they do that, but you guys basically kind of like built a community for your fellow crew members around it. So I'd love to kind of hear about what it was like to be on that set for that duration, and just
we had, like you said,
a community college kind of way.
It became 6 months. You have to create a whole world. We always felt, the actors did, that we didn't live in Malta in some sort of a little cottage or a bungalow. We lived in Sweet Haven with 12-hour a day shooting.
Yeah.
And even sometimes longer. Your whole life was really about that make-believe town. And they ordered $100,000 worth of new lumber from Canada. And they built that, and they built the town with maybe 15 buildings. And Bob Altman said, I don't want any fake fronts like in a Western. I want to be able to go behind every building, or down beside and below and above. Just don't build any fake buildings, but have 4 sides. And several of them had chimneys, and you could put in dry ice or something. And from the long shot from the water, you could see them at night with some of the chimneys had smoke coming out.
Yeah.
But it was after we built it, after Wolf Kroger built the town with a lot of Maltese carpenters and helpers for about 4 months. The new lumber made the Sweet Haven. Then they distressed it to look 100 years old, like a whaling village in New England or something. And it had more character than most sets I've ever seen.
Very true.
The big Rough House Cafe had lots of scenes. That was the biggest place. But the Olives, the oil family had their home and a lot of other buildings in between. I spent more time in the oil family home. I don't know if I lived there, I was a visitor, but I had my meals there anyway. One of my happy thoughts is that I had two friends who were great actors named McIntyre Dixon and Richard Libertini, who were actually a kind of a comedy team. And I got them both the job. And I wouldn't have been able to do that except that I had Robert Altman's ear and he trusted me. I need a guy who's tall and thin with a beard. I said, I have the perfect guy. So Richard Libertini became a pushcart vendor. And that McIntyre Dixon became Olive Oyle's father. Coal oil. And her brother was castor oil. But we had a great time. We lived and breathed Sweet Haven. And a guy who played castor oil, Olive's brother, funny, kind of a short, chubby comedian, was Donovan Scott, and he's become one of my best friends still.
Oh, that's great.
From all that time, way back in 1980. Whenever I need help with video, he transfers scenes from movies onto video, makes me a montage or a collection of my scenes or something. So I've worked with him on, I don't know, obviously 100, 150 times on various things. I needed video-wise. That great friend of mine too.
This was also Robin Williams' first real big box office kind of thing. And unfortunately at the time, it didn't do that well. These days, it's regarded as a cult classic. And, if you look at videos of this on YouTube, like people are just commenting about how dedicated and committed all the actors are. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that they built these entire, not just fake sets, but real, actual tactile sets that can actually house people.
Well, there was a tremendous number of characters that some of which were in the old comic strip, but many of which Bob just invented. He got clowns from Italian circus to play parts. The stuntmen were from Italy. We had some of Fellini's crew. Our cinematographer had worked for Fellini. It was a terrific big budget show.
It's funny to think about that because it's like, this kid's movie essentially, but you got folks who worked for Fellini working on Popeye. I mean, that's just such a fun thing to kind of say out loud.
Yeah, our AD was our director of photography was Italian, Giuseppe Rotuno, and his AD was Italian. So we hired another AD who spoke English because the cast was American. But we began to teach a class in Italian. It was such an amazing thing. You may remember reading some of it in my book. We began to create classes in the evening. It became a little community college. You could study dance with our choreographer. You could study music. Robin, myself, Libertini, and Dixon created an improvisational class. Libertini and three other friends created a Dixieland jazz band. The guy there who came from NYU who taught circus skills was one of our people on the crew. And he had parallel bars. Many people learned to juggle. It was just amazing. There were people who teach magic tricks to each other. It was like a small university.
Yeah.
And we could all be in the evening. It's all voluntary, but it was so boring in that little country that there wasn't much else to do. And also we watched dailies every night. Unlike most directors, Robert Altman would let you watch dailies. In fact, he wanted you there. So it was a big festival of rewarding the actors with what they did the day before. So it's a great deal of camaraderie working with him. And that was my fifth movie. That was my fourth movie with him, but I did 5 altogether. So he really created my career in films.
Do you think that Popeye was actually a bad movie, or is it just misunderstood?
Well, I think it fell apart at the end a little bit. At the end, there was a chase between 2 boats. Well, boats go 5 miles an hour. That's a very gentle chase.
Not a high-speed chase.
And there's 2 boats, one chasing the other. Olive Oil has been kidnapped by Pluto. But I was in the Navy, so I know that boats go very slow, 5-10 knots an hour. So it's a chase without any real speed. And if all you have as a background is a horizon. But if you're in a movie like Speed, every time you see a telephone pole go by, you know how fast you're going.
Yeah.
But that's not able to be done when the horizon is miles and miles and miles away. So these little tiny people chasing, they tried to make the excitement with the music. That still didn't make it go any faster visually. But I thought it was most interesting because of the multitudes of characters, all kinds of strange people. Donald Moffat was in a large tricycle. He was a town cop, taxing everybody. Not a cop, a tax man.
Oh, he's a tax man, yep.
It was so full of great visual things. You would walk past a pelican sitting on a post and he turned his head and looked at you. It was just so much invention. Here's a piece of trivia most people don't know. I'm playing Wimpy, who loves hamburgers and never ate one hamburger in that movie. Now, I had tons of experience in commercials, and you never eat the food you don't want to eat 6 takes of cereal because you'll get sick, or if you do 10 takes of some food. So what they always do is when they say cut, you spit it out in the spit bucket. Otherwise, actors get sick, or it's too much.
Yeah.
Who knows? Sometimes you want to 12, 15 takes on something. If it's a rich food or something, you don't want to have that much food in your stomach. So I learned over the years not to eat the food in commercials. So I asked the prop men to make me a hamburger out of latex, which they did. It made of thin latex. It had lettuce, tomato, burger, cheese, sesame seeds on top. It looked exactly like it. I said, make it look like there's a bite that's been taken out of it. I always used to start the scene by holding a hamburger up.
Yeah.
And I would be chewing with my tongue against my cheek.
Ah, that's the secret.
And I never once ate a hamburger. First of all, I tried some of the hamburgers. The meat came from Germany. It wasn't exactly like a Texas steer. It wasn't very good. But good or not, I didn't want to fill myself with food all day that might be too much. So I was a magician once, and I know about the misdirection. So I did it with misdirection. Nobody would ever believe I didn't eat a hamburger. Because if a guy's holding that many hamburgers, walking around with them like they're part of his body, of course he's eating hamburgers. But I was using technique to make it look that way.
I mean, for a character like Wimpy, I think like 90% of his body is made of hamburger anyway. So that's pretty amazing you fooled us all with that.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, which is a great way to save money as you build your collection. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, which is a great way to save money as you build your collection. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a pay what you want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Hi, I'm Braden.
And I'm Connie.
We're the hosts of the fun-filled food podcast Epicurean Unicorn.
On Epicurean Unicorn, we converse with food industry professionals.
Connie, aren't we food industry professionals?
That is what we tell people. Okay, all kidding aside, on Epicurean Unicorn, we bring our combined 40 years of food industry experience directly to you through conversations with other industry professionals.
We focus on bringing you inspiring stories and current topics that are affecting the foods you enjoy every day. Plus, there's a lot of fun banter.
Only on the episodes without you, Braden.
Hey! If you've ever wondered how to make the best banana sandwich, or if there is a library dedicated to sourdough,
Spoiler, there is.
or what the future of sustainability in the food industry looks like,
Then this is the podcast for you.
do both your ear holes and your pie hole a favor and check out Epicurean Unicorn, a podcast for food lovers from food industry professionals.
You can find and subscribe to Epicurean Unicorn on all major podcast platforms. You can also check out our crazy work adventures on all social media by searching at Parados US.
Nailed it.
Braden, that's a different show we aren't affiliated with.
But Jacques Therese was on episode 3. Check it out on all major podcast platforms.
Well, anyway,
Epicurean Unicorn, a magical adventure for foodies everywhere. Listen anywhere quality podcasts are found.
bye.
That's not how we sign off.
Bye.
Be seeing you.
Bye. Bye. Goodbye.
Well, Paul, we're talking about Movie Dad, and this past weekend I got real lucky, I guess, because I feel like this interview was meant to be fate, because I was watching on TV, and for the first time ever, I saw this movie that you're in, and I'm going to give you a clue for it. Let's see if you can figure out which one it is.
Yeah.
Paul, would you like some zucchini?
It's not breaking away, is it?
It's Breaking Away. I just watched that for the very first time, and I gotta tell you, it's a really beautiful film. I really enjoyed it. Your performance especially was amazing in that, and
That's my signature film.
Yeah,
Best
I
thing
mean,
I ever did.
it's some great work.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
And in the book, you write about the scene towards the end of the film, which is where you have a one-on-one with Dennis Christopher. And I'd love if you could kind of tell us about why that scene was kind of very important to you and what that scene meant for you.
We're walking on the campus at night with my son, Dennis Christopher. I talk about having been a stonemason helping to build these buildings. I said, it's funny, we worked and slaved, we put our heart in these buildings. And when it was all done, they didn't seem to belong to us anymore. I felt funny going to those buildings. I guess it wasn't wanted because our work was done. Then we stop and I sit on a stone bench. And he's talking about going to college. And I'm rubbing my hand on a stone bench. This is a stonemason who's no longer doing that work. And you get the feeling that what I said in the book was it looked as if his hands remembered. And in Breaking Away, I said his hands remembered. But that was a callback for another scene where my father had a stroke and didn't recognize the family, but he walked around the house aimlessly. And I used to notice him feeling the door frames, going up the door frame to the top where the corner joins together. And he would be investigating that with his fingers. And I thought to myself, he doesn't know who his family is, but he knows that work, that carpentry work. He knows that was his. He knows he's a carpenter. And then I say his hands remembered. Then I said it again when I was stroking the stone bench in Breaking Away. A callback, both situations. His hands remembered. Really came from real life.
It's a very powerful scene, very emotional, and it feels like so much of you is really in that film. I feel like, of all the things I've seen during my research for this chat with you today, like Breaking Away just feels like the most Paul Dooley Paul, maybe the most open version of him on screen.
It is, yeah. It's the best. I got more reviews than you would believe. Maybe 40 different critics raved about it. Raved.
I'd believe it. So, Paul, let's beam into our Star Trek discussion here at last. And we have 4 episodes of you to talk about on Deep Space Nine. You played Enabrin Tain. So in your book, you do talk about it for about a half a page. But here on Trek Untold, I'm going to try and see how much I can pull out of you about this one. Because Enabrin Tain is one of those roles that we Trekkies really love. It's a very important role to us. And yeah, it's a pretty amazing role again for you, I think. So I'd like to hear, we kind of take it from the top of the story, if you will. Had you ever auditioned for Star Trek previously, before you were in Enabrin Tain?
I never auditioned. At a certain point in my career out here, I didn't need to audition anymore. I was given a job. It's at a certain point, you don't have to audition anymore if you're well enough known. Almost every guest star in a sitcom I never auditioned for. They just wanted someone like me, and they hired me. But I didn't audition for Star Trek. But I had been so, there's a lot of drama in Breaking Away as well as comedy.
Yeah.
But I would say 90% of my work was playing comedy roles. Some of the fathers are sort of humorous and sort of not, but I was most comfortable and had most experience doing comedy of sorts. What with my Second City experience and all. A sketch actor. I also did stand-up years ago. I was on the Tonight Show doing stand-up years ago. But I was surprised to be called for, I wasn't the type, I didn't think. Being called for Star Trek, and I was glad to go and do it. It's 4 hours of makeup, which I didn't know in advance. Another half hour to take the makeup off. But I really loved the idea of playing the drama, and I really got into his character. He was not a nice guy. He was a sort of a behind the scenes, what they call the guy that gets people elected, but nobody knows he's pulling the strings,
The spy master sort of character.
Yeah. He was very almost Machiavellian. He sounded almost like a nice guy, gentle. But boy, he had a real devil's approach, And one of the endings of one of my favorite scenes, he says, rather than have you have a full life and enjoy it, I'd rather see you miserable, living outside of this planet or this world with no one, miserable, unhappy for the rest of your life. That's the end of one scene.
Yeah.
And it's great fun to play that rich kind of mean guy drama thing, but almost smiling through it, just pleasant.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people really are drawn to with this character. And, we're talking about the different films and shows that you've done, and it is a lot of comedy. And I feel like you're really reveling in playing this kind of low down, dirty heel. Because it really feels like you're a totally different person. And it's like not even a challenge for you to play this character. It just looks like you're just so enamored in it and so immersed in this world that it's just a natural fit, and maybe like something you've been kind of screaming to get out of yourself even. It's real wonderful work in this.
Yeah, I did love playing it. And they're all interesting, but there is one scene that ends where he shows really how terrible he is. It's a real bastard, but I love playing it. Great fun.
So you worked alongside with Andrew Robinson in the show. He plays Garak, and you guys could have some great scenes together. But I hear on Star Trek shows, generally speaking, because they're done very quickly, you guys don't really get to rehearse. But you and Andrew Robinson just kind of clicked. So I'm wondering, did you guys do any work together before you filmed, or was it just kind of a natural thing that happened on set?
No, well, there might be rehearsal, but that's more for the camera.
Yeah, more for blocking.
And you know your words in advance. Of course, if you mix up, they just do another take, if you miss a line. Sometimes if an actor's having trouble with difficult speeches, difficult words, they'll actually shoot it one line at a time Then they can always cut back and forth between the other character. So if an actor's having a lot of trouble, they'll just do a sentence at a time, then go back and get another one. But that was great fun. I enjoyed that, and those actors are very good. I even told Garak, who was supposed to be my son, but I don't claim him. I don't admit to having that son.
Yeah.
He's a real bastard, this guy.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but Andrew Robinson, he wrote an entire book from the perspective of Garak, and it's called A Stitch in Time. And it's essentially a 300-page character study that he did of this character. And it basically takes you from like the starting point of his life all the way through, his relationship with Enabrin Tain, to even beyond what happens after Star Trek Deep Space Nine ends. So
I didn't hear about that book.
It's a really amazing book, and it's a real just masterpiece in terms of like understanding a character. And he really got Garak. So I'm curious, like, what kind of prep did you do to become an Enabrin Tain? Was there any sort of like character in literature or in movies that you decided to pull from, or did all this kind of come internally from you and from the words on the page?
I think I just took it from the words in the script. I just let that inform me who he was. And I pretty soon knew he was dishonest. They even had me dressed with leather patches on my elbows like I was a college professor. And they said to me, he belongs to something like, the CIA of that at that time. But he's no longer with them, but he's still pulling strings because he's a kingmaker, that kind of thing. So they gave me some preparation in that sense.
Okay.
But I love playing it because it's very thick with character.
Yeah.
I want to show you something you're going to enjoy.
Oh, okay.
This is one of my favorite pictures. If you can, I hope you can see it all.
There you are. There's an Enabrin Tain in action.
And it's all in shades of blue, but it's a gorgeous picture.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember this, Paul, but there's one of the episodes that you did. It's the two-parter, which was Improbable Cause. I believe we're talking about Improbable Cause, or it might be the Dias Cast. I forget which one, but there's a scene. It's the first time you worked on screen with Andrew Robinson and Renee Auberjonois. And I picked out the scene in particular because the way everybody is manipulating their bodies and doing all these little small things with their heads and their eyes, it's really amazing because we're talking about a room with three dudes covered in makeup. And you can't really emote the same way you would emote if you were like, Wimpy and Popeye or in Breaking Away without any of that makeup on. So to me, it's such a masterclass of like, it's like such a masterclass of using body language. And I would love to hear if you remember anything about using body language to perform as an Enabrin Tain.
I didn't. There wasn't. If I had a way of moving or anything, it was unconscious. It just did it by instinct. But Renee had such a complicated, almost a mask.
Yeah.
He had to have his lunch through a straw because he couldn't chew. It would ruin the makeup. And he looked like he was a newborn. He was very pale, like he didn't have any normal flesh color. It was almost pink. It was a great makeup.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek. And
he's a great actor anyway.
Great actor and director, yeah.
Oh, yeah. He did a movie with Bob Altman called, it's about birds. He was playing a bird. It was, there's a guy flying in a stadium down in Dallas. I can't remember the name of that.
Oh, Brewster McCloud?
Brewster McCloud. My wife is nearby.
Hello, Winnie.
That's right. Anyway, he played a teacher of ornithology, just a short scene. And he was made up and acted like a bird. He's a wonderful, wonderful actor. And Bob did a movie in Ireland. I forget the name of that one too. And Renee was in that.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you got the role of Enabrin Tain, did you know it would be recurring, or was there discussion of it being recurring? Or when you got that first part, was it just like you think you were going to do one part and that's it?
I don't think I knew they were going to bring him back.
Okay.
To me, it was just a job.
Okay.
But by the end of the by the last day, that we think we're going to bring him back and use him again. So just be aware.
Now, you hadn't really done any sci-fi either up until basically Star Trek, I feel like. So how different is it for you to be in that kind of a set? I mean, I know a TV show or a film set's a set, but we're talking about Star Trek with these enormous, crazy alien architecture things all around you. What was it like for you to kind of get into that feeling? Did that help you? Did it make you nervous or anxious?
I think it always helps you if the set is very specific. If it's just a typical room with a couple of paintings on the walls and a couch and two chairs, it's not something you think about. It's just to go to that spot, hit your mark, say your words. It doesn't influence me very much, that kind of thing. But being in Sweet Haven it influenced me as a performer. I felt unlike myself when I was there. And the odd thing is, having been typed as his father for so many films, although I love doing character stuff, the only real stretch I ever did was playing Wimpy. He's nothing like the fathers. In fact, he's a bit of a con man.
Yeah.
He sells the baby for a bag of hamburgers. Yeah, a lot of my fan mail is Popeye and 16 Candles and Cars 1, 2, and 3 and things like that. Sometimes it's Strange Brew, which is a little bit of a cult film.
Rick Moranis, that's a good one too. So I wanted to ask you about the very final scene that you did as Enabrin Tain, and that's in the episode Purgatory's Shadow, and that's essentially the death scene for Enabrin Tain. And he's a character, as we learned, who's basically he wants to see his enemies die, even in his dying moments. He wants to make sure his enemies are all removed and taken care of. And with his very last breaths, he finally becomes a father to his estranged son. And honestly, it's a really powerful moment. And like I said, I rewatched stuff for this interview. I just rewatched that episode again, and I was actually moved to tears. And I don't know what was different for me about it, but that scene was just heartbreaking to watch. And just hearing him tell Garak how proud he was of him to be his son. It's such an emotional thing. I'm curious if you have any memories from your final day as Enabrin Tain. Do you remember doing that scene with Andrew?
I do not.
Okay.
Sometimes if you have 100 credits,
yeah,
it's a little difficult to pick out certain ones. They are around. I won't forget playing Wimpy. But sometimes I've done what might turn out to be a very good performance in something, but it was just a job.
Well, for us Trekkies, like you said earlier in the interview, Enabrin Tain is such a big part of things. And really, it's what you did with that character was wonderful. And watching it again just years later still holds up. Great performance. And it really is such a different thing from what we're used to seeing you do. And I feel like maybe that's why it stands out even more, because we know you as the dad, but here you are as, the Machiavellian bad guy.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch in a way. It's not typical of what I do.
Did you, I don't know if you remember, did you actually watch any of your episodes of Star Trek? Are you an actor who will typically watch things that he's in, or do you tend to stay away from that?
No, I'm not against watching stuff. I'm often curious. And somehow I managed to get, I think it's 4 episodes. Yeah. I managed to get copies of them.
Okay.
And now and then my daughter is 33 and she has done so many things, she's never seen them all. So I say, you want to see something interesting? So I'll just pull off an Enabrin Tain and show it to her. Wow, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, it's some great stuff. And you really pulled the best out of these actors too. I mean, working with Alexander Siddig as Dr. Bashir, working with Andrew Robinson, working with Renee. I mean, when you come on set, I should say, it feels like, you're really making them get to your level, which is something I also really enjoyed watching in these episodes again.
Well, actors have a way of wanting to hook up. They want a way. Of course, you're just hitting your marks and saying your words, but you want to make it look like you, and you're drawn to the characters or you're against those characters. There's a certain dynamic that does evolve when you're working with other actors. You're either a friend or an enemy, or you might have a motive about something. So that draws actors together when they have underlying feelings about each other.
As we mentioned at the start of this interview here, you're 94 right now, and you still have things on IMDb that are listed as in production, which is astounding to me that you're still working right now, which is amazing. Besides being a vegetarian until you were 17, what would you say has attributed to your professional longevity and your personal longevity? Because I gotta tell you, Paul, I mean, you don't look 94. I feel like your voice hasn't even changed over the decades. I mean, you look and feel like I've seen you in the movies, so it's pretty amazing.
Well, I, oddly enough, was breastfed till I was 5.
I did read that. That was a weird factoid.
And the point is, it wasn't unusual. I grew up in the Depression.
Yeah.
People were out of work.
Yeah.
Milk costs money. And as long as the mother's milk continued, many people, farm people, poor people, they just kept breastfeeding. Well, the colostrum, the immunity thing you get from breast milk, I had 5 years of it, and that's immunity system of mine. So between vegetarianism and breastfeeding, I think that's part of why I am in good health. My parents didn't live to be 94. They were in their 70s.
I mean, like the one thing I noticed when I was, again, listening to that Alan Alda podcast and just talking to you today too, it's just like how sharp and quick you still are. I mean, you don't lose that. So
No, my mind is very good.
Yeah.
Alan's an old friend of mine.
Yeah. I love
As
hearing
you
your
may
stories about working
remember-
the spaghetti bars together.
He helped me write a monologue for the Tonight Show. I was on there once, and they said, I want you to come back in 2 weeks. I didn't have a monologue. So he and I wrote one, and it worked out fine, and became a good friend of mine. And I loved his podcast I was on. He's a very wonderful guy. Just what you think he'd be from hearing him talk. He's one of the great humanitarian, loves people. I like him very much.
I mean, honestly, Paul, I wish that Alan Alda did some Star Trek so I would have an excuse to try and get him on this show too. All right, so Paul, as we come to a conclusion of this interview, I got a few last questions for you. These are kind of the lightning round questions. This is where that whole Alan Alda inspiration comes from here. Start with this one here. Best day that you ever had on a set and the worst day that you ever had on a set.
Best day was on a film called Breaking Away, doing a scene, walking on campus at night and sitting on a stone bench. Worst day, I worked with a British director, Michael Winner, and he was no winner. This was in Death Wish, the first one.
Oh, yeah.
There were 3 actresses playing hookers. I was a cop dressed in a warm cop's, pea coat. And it was in the middle of Manhattan, just not too far from the Hudson River, the real strong, cold wind coming off. Everyone is freezing. We're huddled together. Well, the director's coming over to talk to you. Okay, so the girls are in short skirts, they're shivering, and I'm cold even in my cop's uniform. And the crew are wearing not only hoodies or toboggan caps or face masks for the cold. They had warm kind of face masks on. And the director comes over, we're huddled together, 3 hookers and myself. He said, here's the scene. You see these hookers over here on the corner. You run over, you chase them, they go down the subway stairs. The next scene will be over there where you see a guy on the ground who's been shot. This is a Star Trek scene. And now, as we're doing this, and he's telling us, he says to me, excuse me, do you have your hands in your pocket while the director is talking? I said, yeah, it's cold. He says, it doesn't matter whether it's cold or not. When you listen to a director, you don't put your hands in your pocket. And I would like to say, how would you like to stick that up your behind? If I were 20 years older and not beginning, I would have told him, you're crazy. I would say, look at the crew, they're warm. What are you talking about? But intimidated by him, I just took it. And I thought, what kind of a jerk is this guy? Years later, I heard from people he's a prick and he's not easy to work with. And he's a bully, and he always talks to the underlings like props and makeup and wardrobe, and talks down his nose at them. No one likes him. Well, that's the worst day I ever had on the set.
That's a pretty horrible day.
Yeah.
Have you ever had or played a role that has changed your perspective on how you thought about something?
I was hired once to play a pedophile. I shot it in Vancouver. It's a story about a girl who's 21, and when she was 14, she was molested by her father. Now her younger sister is around 14, and she's worrying that the father is going to molest her, although she's never mentioned it before. She let it slide. So I said to the director, why did you think of me for this part? He said, because I thought the audience would trust you. I thought there would be a question mark over all over the scenes. It was in court, a lot of it in court. And I realized it changed my way of thinking. I'm the same actor that many people loved for a long time. And now I'm able to play something where they don't like me anymore. They don't have that relationship with them anymore. They might have seen me do 20 or 30 things. So I was miscast, but as an actor, I did what I could with it. But it really struck me that with all the goodwill I had collected with all my different performances, mostly positive, that I had to play this so it would be believed as a bad guy. So that's why he hired me, because it wouldn't be easy if I normally look like a scowling kind of guy. If I look like a molester, then it would be too easy. He said, I wanted them to be on your side in the trial until it came out that you had molested your young children. That had a tremendous effect on me for some reason. I learned from it.
What's something that you know today that you wish you knew back when you were first starting out?
I wish I had the balls to tell that director off.
What's the most valuable piece of information or advice someone ever gave you about life or about acting that you still think about and use today?
Well, it was about life and belief in yourself and looking into yourself to find out who you really are.
So, Paul, as we mentioned, you have done a lot of things throughout your life, a lot of roles. We obviously cannot talk about all of them, or else that would be a marathon of a year-long episode with you. But, through all your work, all the things you've learned through your life, all the things you've accomplished, what do you want the legacy of Paul Dooley to be?
Well, I like to be remembered for being great at comedy, but in a funny way, I know I reach more people by being a father in these movies, especially the iconic Molly Ringwald part. And I like that idea of people remembering me fondly as somebody they could trust, or was understanding and empathetic and very humble, really. But the second version of it is that I was good at comedy. After all, I worked with Christopher Guest and Larry David, improvising all my words.
And we didn't even talk about that stuff because you did a lot of work with Christopher Guest and his films, which I'm also a big fan of. I love seeing you in A Mighty Wind and hearing you sing and do that kind of stuff also.
Yeah, he's a great guy, brilliant. I knew Chris when he was 17. His mother was my agent. She was an agent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So last thing for today, Paul, what is the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
I still get mail about it. I did 4 of them, but I did a dozen on the practice, but I don't get mail on that because Trekkies are very loyal, very inquisitive, and they love to hear the history of things and talk to people who are involved. You don't find, I've done all those David Kelly shows, but I don't get tons of people tracking me down to get a photograph of me on a show. But Star Trek is much more intriguing to people, has fans. I mean, more fans than almost any other kind of show. They're more loyal, they're more obsessed almost. I mean, you take something like Friends, they have loyal fans, but they're not as loyal as Trekkies. There's something about it that people are just fascinated by every detail of it.
Well, I mean, how often is it that you get to talk to the head of the Obsidian Order? So, if you can understand why, us Trekkies are crazy for a reason.
Yeah, no, it's made its mark, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
There'll probably be more of them to come.
I'm sure there will be, yeah. I'm glad they are, because it's going to keep me in business too.
Anyway, I was very glad to be called to do it, and I was glad that we did more than one. And it was the perfect number.
Yes, and I'm happy you got to have a full-on character arc too. We got to see the entire story of Enabrin Tain. And likewise, I'm very happy to be able to spend this time with you today. I've been trying to keep myself together this whole time because this is one of those interviews where I'm just inside screaming because I've seen you in so many things, and I very much admire all of your work and who you as a person also. So not just as a performer, but all the things you've done beyond stage and screen too. So it's been really wonderful to chat with you today, Paul. Thank you for giving so much yourself in this interview and giving so much yourself throughout all of your work that you've done. And I look forward to seeing what you're going to be doing next at 95 and 96 and on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing me into your world, and call me anytime you want.
Yeah, well, as they say, Paul, live long and prosper. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Trek Untold, all one word. If you'd like to directly support this podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter over on patreon.com/TrekUntold, which gives you access to some great perks that can't be beat. Or pick up some merchandise from our store, or use my Amazon shop link to check out all kinds of different Star Trek merchandise. Links for all these things are in the show notes. Shout out to Triple Fiction Productions for being a key sponsor of Trek Untold. Don't forget to check them out and all of the fine folks whose ads you've seen or heard on this podcast too. If you have any questions, feedback, or comments for the show, or would like to suggest a guest or discuss sponsorship options for any of these episodes in the future, send me a message at trekuntold@gmail.com. I hope to see you here again as we uncover more untold stories from Star Trek and beyond, and get to know even more amazing people who have contributed to this ever-expanding universe. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.